Today we are going to be talking about Australian whiskey. And more specifically, we're going to try and answer the question, who killed Australian whiskey? Today we're going to be talking about a very specific company called Starward Whiskey. If you haven't heard about Starward Whiskey, they're a whiskey distillery from Melbourne, Australia. Sorry, I get really busted on that. Melbourne. It's either Melbourne or Melbourne, I think, but not or Melbourne, but not Melbourne. There's two reasons why I brought up Starward at all. First, they gave me free whiskey, so I have to disclose that at the beginning of the video. They did not sponsor this video in any way. This video is not about Starward specifically, but it's the only Australian whiskey that I have on hand. I have a whole bunch of expressions of it, and I want to go through some tasting notes with you guys, because I do think it would be informative to taste through some Australian whiskey and see what it tastes like, see what the differences and similarities that it has to stuff like Scotch, Irish whiskey, bourbon, whatever. There's a lot of really fun stuff going on in Australia. But what this episode is actually about is why have we not heard about Australian whiskey more? And why is there not more of it on the market in the United States? So I was really struck to learn that Australia has a very, very, very long history of whiskey distilling. As long, if not longer, than the American tradition. So why have we not heard more about this whiskey? Why is it not a much bigger industry than it is in the world? Well, guess what, guys? It's kind of a funny story. Whiskey has been being distilled in Australia since the early 1800s. The first settlers arrive in 1788, and while it's true that Australia was used as a prison island by the British, within the first 50 or so years, there are many, many, many more European settlers on the continent. Not just prisoners, but actually people settling the continent. And of course, many of them, if not all of those settlers, had to be farmers. And then back in those days, where there are farmers, as I have said many times before, there are spirits. Farmers usually had a still going on their farm to make spirits out of those grains that were not good enough to be sold at market. And because the settlers brought barley over from Britain, the spirits that they made became whiskey. They also quickly figured out that they could grow grapes. So as well as whiskey, they also made wine and brandy a lot in those early days. Those were like the three main spirits you have in Australia. And of course, the whiskey industry started out very organically. At first, whiskey was made just for home consumption, but as time went on and distillers added more stills, the next logical step was to start making whiskey for commercial production and just monetize the waste from their grains. The first licensed distillery was at Hobart Town, Tasmania. It was established in 1822 and it was called the Sorrel Distillery. It turns out that Tasmania has a similar climate to Scotland, and they have sources of natural peat as well. So the whiskey they started making was very close to Scotch. They just naturally adapted the Scottish way of making whiskey. And of course, since whiskey production became high quality and successful, many craft distilleries started popping up all over the settled parts of Australia. So of course, as time went on, the government began to realize that whiskey production was profitable, and of course, as all governments do, they wanted to get a slice of the pie for themselves. So they started levying taxes on whiskey production beginning in 1840. And at that time, they started to phase out craft distilleries by passing laws that made craft distilling impossible. In 1862, the Distillation Act was passed, putting even more restrictions on whiskey production, which was, as they say, the final nail in the coffin. Craft distilling in Australia was dead, and by 1901, only a few gigantic distillers were able to operate. So let's fast forward to post-World War II, and two UK companies, Gilbey's and the Distillers Company of Edinburgh, seized an opportunity to control the whiskey market in Australia. They bought up the major Australian distilleries and effectively killed the quality of the spirits they made. Australian-made whiskeys were also so heavily taxed that it became more expensive to buy the British whiskey, which historically had been more expensive. And so due to the lesser quality of Australian whiskey, the people had no choice but to buy British-owned whiskey. So over time, this would tarnish the reputation of Australian-made whiskey. And the question that popped up in my brain when I learned this was this a hit job? Did they do this on purpose to tank Australian whiskey production and only sell British spirits? For that, I'll let you guys decide. From there, the Australian category of whiskey began to decline until the 1980s when the homegrown Australian whiskey industry effectively died out completely. So those large British companies removed the hefty import taxes, which made the British-owned whiskey more affordable. And then, of course, there was a decreased demand in Australian-made whiskey because A, like I said earlier, the quality was terrible, and B, it was completely expensive and less expensive to buy the British stuff, and so distilleries eventually shuttered. And between 1980 and 1990, it's said that not one drop of legal commercial whiskey was made in Australia at all. So then, in 1991, a guy named Bill Lark started to question why Australia didn't make any whiskey anymore. He knew that the Tasmanian climate was close to the Scottish climate, and so he started to petition the government to allow craft distilleries to make whiskey. And it's needless to say, you know, because we've got some Australian whiskey on hand now, that he was successful, and in 1992, Bill established the Lark Distillery in Hobart, Tasmania. And by 1998, he had a full operation going. Starward was founded in 2007 in Melbourne by a guy named David Vitale, who had previously spent a few years learning to make whiskey from Lark himself. Dave's vision for the brand was quite simple. He wanted to make a delicious and distinctive Australian whiskey, which could be a player on the world whiskey scene, and that spoke to the place that it was made. He was thinking about terroir in the same way that Mark Rainier of Bruichladdich, Waterford, and Renegade Rum has been thinking about terroir, which is typically a term associated with the wine industry, which actually makes a lot of sense because the wine industry is huge in Australia as well. So this guy was thinking about whiskey in the same terms as wine and thinking about how can the whiskey reflect the place that it's from. So by the time David got involved, there were a few distilleries operating, kind of centrally located in Tasmania, making that Scotch style of whiskey. So Vitale's approach to whiskey making was a little bit different. His first dream was to have a beer to offer the world. So when he began distilling whiskey, he was really coming at it from a perspective of a brewer. As such, he utilized brewer's malt and brewer's yeast, which is really a bit different of a flavor profile in his whiskey, and he began fully maturing his whiskey in red wine barrels, of which Australia has a ton of. So Starward's production team consists of former brewers and winemakers rather than a long lineage of whiskey makers like we typically hear about in countries like the United States and Scotland. So this unique perspective has been a driving force of creativity and innovation at a place like Starward. Today, there are currently around 100 distilleries producing whiskey in Australia, and Starward, I kind of feel, is really trailblazing the path for Australian whiskey in the United States. They are the most visible that I have seen anyway, and I really hope to see a lot more Australian brands on the market. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. So I would be remiss, I think, Marius, if we didn't bring out some Starward whiskey and taste it. Yeah? First one up, Starward's Solera. Solera is Australian single malt whiskey. It's got a mash bill of 100% malted barley. It was aged 3 years in an ex-Apera cask. And for those of you that don't know what Apera is, it's a fortified wine native to Australia. The barrels used to make Solera are sourced from the McWilliams winery in New South Wales, known for making really brilliant Apera. I guess they're the top of the Apera winemakers. This bottle comes in at 43% ABV, or 86 proof. And another notable thing about this bottle is that instead of just dumping spirit into the used wine cask and calling it a day, they take the spirits and they re-char them so that they get more flavor from it. Okay, so let's crack this guy open. Let's give some tasting notes on it. Okay. It's got nice color, yeah. It's like, I would call that caramel color. Really nice, really, you get that wine. You can really get that kind of grapefruit, maybe a little tropical fruit, like right on the nose. And it does smell a bit like you can get the wine on the nose. Like a hint of caramel, maybe some vanilla, a little bit of honey. You get that sort of barley-ish business, that maltiness from it. Okay, let's taste. Ooh, really nice, yeah. You get vanilla. You get a little bit of honey. Again, you get those dried fruits. I don't know if that's just like, you know, the nose is enhancing the flavor so much that I'm just tasting the same things. You get a little caramel, tiny bit of that like kind of maple, a little maple vibe to it as well. It's got a medium length, so it doesn't like die on your palate, but it's not super strong when it goes into your mouth. So like as you sip it, it seems a little thin at first, and then it opens up really nicely on the back of your palate, and the length goes on. It doesn't just cut off, but it doesn't go on forever. It's what I would call medium length. Maybe a little cacao on the back palate. Pretty tasty. The next expression up we have is Nova. The Nova expression is aged 2 years and is also 100% malted barley. And then where this deviates from the Solera, instead of heavily recharring the barrels, they use fresh wine barrels of Syrah, Pinot Noir, and Cabernet, and then they steam the inside of the cask so as not to disturb the wine, and then fully age them. Because Melbourne's constant fluctuations in temperature and weather, they can achieve full quality whiskey in a relatively short amount of time. And I'll give you guys one guess as to why that happens. Did you think about it? And now let me tell you why. And because it's the expansion and the retraction of the wood during the seasons that will give the whiskey this is going to sound kind of dirty, but it gives the whiskey full penetration of the wood. And so you get all the flavor there as well. Let's open this guy up, and maybe we can, oh, I'm not doing a very good job with these bottles here. Ooh, nice sound though. There we go. So then it's a little redder in color and a little lighter in color. By the way, I said Syrah for the wine, but it's in the Australian, it's not S-Y-R-A-H, it's Shiraz. How do they pronounce it in like the Australian? Is it pronounced Shiraz, or is it pronounced Shiraz, or is it pronounced Syrah?
I thought it was Shiraz, but it's
Shiraz. Here we go. Ooh, a little lighter, a little more wine, a little balsamic maybe, some berries, some pomegranate. Not as deep. It's a little lighter. It's a little kiss of those things. All right, let's taste it. Ooh, another medium finish whiskey. And this one goes in real light. It, like as soon as you sip it, it's super light, and then it just opens up and you get that vibrant berries, and you have vibrant wine, and you have vibrant balsamic, although it's just a touch on the back palate. Ooh, I like that one. I mean, I like them both, but this would be my daily sipper, I think. Now that I'm letting it sit in my mouth, it has kind of a drying effect on the palate, which might be the tannins from the wine, I don't know. And then also a little chocolatey vibe. So the twofold, which is our next one up, is a blend of 40% single malt whiskey made by Starward, and then 60% wheat whiskey sourced from the Manildra Distillery, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The whiskey is very much inspired by Maker's Mark's flavor profile. It's a utility whiskey. It's perfect for cocktails and sipping. So it's gonna hit you like your favorite wheated bourbon. Okay, here we go. Also very red in color. It's like hazelnut, but it's not like the flavor of hazelnut. It's like, I don't know if you've ever done this, but have you ever like stuck your nose into a hazelnut bag and then like smelled just the smell of the nut itself? It's like a very, it's not a super strong, it's very delicate, but it's like, it's got, I don't know, I can't even describe what that is.
No.
It's such a hard thing to put a descriptor towards. It's like...
The smell of nuts?
It's like, yeah, it smells like hazelnuts. It smells like hazelnuts. Because, you know, if you smell a hazelnut and you smell an almond, it's a different smell. Maybe a little chocolate note as well. Ooh, fresh berries, strawberry, maybe a little blackberry, a little cacao, definitely hazelnuts.
So with
caramel.
Little like Nutella?
Yeah, kind of a little Nutella vibe. Yeah, it's a little Nutella vibe. It's like a little chocolatey, a little hazelnutty. It's got some really nice berries, like right on the front. And then you get that Nutella kind of vibe on the back palate. It's really nice. I like it. I don't want to say this because I'm not exactly sure if this is like off the market or they don't do it or it was like a limited thing. So I got to do some research, a little bit more research on this bottle, and then I will we'll get back to you on that. Instead of getting back to you on that, just look in the description below and I will tell you whether or not this is still available. It is good. This is good. All right, it's time to open the Pièce de Résistance. As you can see, I've never tasted this whiskey. I have not opened it up. I was kind of cheating with these three because I've tasted them all previously. I almost got it off in one shot. I'm kind of proud of myself. I should have just done that with all of them.
Yeah.
So the Vitalis whiskey is also a single malt whiskey, and it's a blend of 6 different whiskeys, all matured in various casks, and those 6 are: first and second fill Apera, Australian sherry cask; red wine, Australian-made tawny port; bourbon cask; Bundaberg rum cask, smallest portion of the blend. So this whiskey tells the story of Starward Distillery. All the cask matured whiskey harkens back to the different whiskey Starward has made over the years. So this is just like a very special bottle, blending up all of the different stuff that they've done over the years. Wow, man, that is like, I get that like almost like oak, like that bitterness of oak, dark fruit, chocolate, a little caramel. Oh, wow. Oh my God. Major chocolate, almost coffee vibe. Like this is going to sound terrible, and I mean this in the best way, but it's like espresso and spent coffee grounds. Does that make sense? But not in a bad way. I don't know how to say that in such a way that doesn't make it bad. And it's got like a dark fruit, like over matured strawberry or something. It's really rich and chocolate as well. It's really good. I mean, it's like a fantastic whiskey. Still available, $150 bottle. It's not too bad, actually. This is good, though. Not an everyday sipper. This is one of those ones that you want to bring out to impress your friends. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I got to say I hope you guys have a good idea about who killed Australian whiskey, and I'm just gonna revel in the amount of Starward that I have. But I highly suggest, whether it's Starward or any other brand, go out, find some Australian whiskey, and drink it, because you know what? It's good, and it's been around just as long, if not longer, as American whiskey. You should absolutely have Australian whiskey in your repertoire, whether you are a collector or whether you are someone who just casually drinks whiskey. Go out and get some. It is good stuff.